Somewhere in America tonight, a family is sitting in the dark, not because they wanted to. Because the power went out 4 hours ago, the store shelves were already stripped bare by the time they got there, and the emergency kit they bought 3 years ago and never opened turned out to be missing half of what they actually needed. This isn't a hurricane story. It isn't a wildfire story. It's a Tuesday story. It's the story of an ice storm, a supply chain hiccup, a job loss, a flu season that hit the whole house at once. The disasters that actually reshape people's lives rarely look like the movies. They look like this: ordinary, quiet, and completely avoidable if you'd made a handful of different decisions 6 months earlier. Here's the truth nobody selling you a $400 bug out bag wants to say out loud. Most people who call themselves prepared aren't. They bought stuff. They didn't build a system. And when the moment actually comes, stuff without a system just becomes clutter in a closet while you're standing in a dark kitchen wondering why none of it works together. So today we're doing something different. We're counting down 15 items that separate people who merely own emergency gear from people who are genuinely ready when everything else stops working. Some of these will surprise you. A few of them are things you already own and have never once tested. And the one sitting at number 1 is the item that preppers with 20 years of experience say they wish they'd prioritize from day one. Instead of last. Keep a pen nearby. Let's start the countdown. 15. The manual can opener. It sounds almost insulting to put on a list like this. Everybody owns a can opener. That's exactly the problem. Everybody owns an electric one, plugged into a wall, completely useless the second the grid goes down. Go check your kitchen drawer right now. And there's a real chance the only can opener in your house needs electricity to function. Here's what makes this item dangerous instead of just inconvenient. Canned food is one of the most reliable calorie sources in any emergency stockpile. It doesn't need refrigeration, it lasts for years, and it's cheap. But a pantry full of unopenable cans isn't food storage. It's a locked safe with no key. Preppers who've actually lived through extended outages will tell you the same story. The moment they needed their cans open, the opener was electric, or it was rusted through from sitting untouched in a bag for 3 years, or it simply wasn't where they thought it was. A $5 manual opener kept somewhere you'll actually remember. It solves a problem most people don't realize they have until the exact moment they can't afford to have it. But a can opener means nothing if there's no clean water to wash down what's inside it. And that's where most emergency plans actually start falling apart. 14. A real water filtration system bottled water feels like preparation. It isn't. It's a countdown timer. A case of water lasts a family a matter of days, it takes up enormous space, and it does absolutely nothing once it runs out. The families who genuinely make it through extended water disruptions aren't the ones who stockpiled the most bottles. They're the ones who can make water safe indefinitely, from a rain barrel, a creek, a pool, a neighbor's well, anywhere. A quality gravity-fed filter or a portable pump filter turns questionable water into drinkable water in minutes, and it does it thousands of times over before it needs replacing. This is the difference between rationing your way toward a crisis and simply not having one. Most people skip this item because it costs more up front than a flat of water bottles, and that single decision, made to save $40, is the one that leaves families rationing, sips 3 days into an outage, while the people who bought a filter are drinking as much as they want. But even with water sorted, none of it matters if you can't find out what's actually happening outside your own front door. 13. A hand crank emergency radio when the power goes out and the cell towers go down with it. Most households discover something uncomfortable. They have no idea what's happening beyond their own street. No news, no warnings, no idea if it's a local outage or something far bigger moving toward them. A hand crank radio with NOAA weather band access needs no batteries, no outlet, and no signal tower. You crank it, and it works. That single fact makes it one of the most underrated tools in any preparedness setup, because information is what turns panic into a plan. Knowing whether to shelter in place or evacuate, knowing how long an outage is expected to last, knowing whether the storm is strengthening or weakening, All of that comes down to one small device that costs less than a dinner out and that almost nobody actually owns. But information alone won't help you if your body gives out before help arrives. And that brings us to the item most people assume they'll never actually need. 12. A fully stocked first aid kit, not a starter one theirs, a specific kind of first aid kit sold in nearly every store, and it's built for a paper cut, not a real emergency. 20 adhesive bandages, a small roll of gauze, some antiseptic wipes. It looks reassuring sitting on a shelf. It is almost useless the moment something actually serious happens. A deep cut, a broken bone, a burn, an allergic reaction, with no hospital reachable for hours or days. A genuinely prepared kit includes trauma supplies most people never think to buy until it's too late, a tourniquet, real wound closure strips, a splint, medications for pain and infection, and the knowledge. Ideally practiced in advance of how to actually use every item inside it. Preppers who've weathered real emergencies consistently say the same thing. The injuries that happen during a crisis are rarely convenient ones, and the ambulance that normally arrives in 8 minutes might not arrive at all. But even the best medical kit can't help you if you can't see what you're treating. Can't cook what you've stored, and can't stay warm long enough to survive the night, and that's exactly where our next item comes in. 11. A complete fire starting kit. Most people own a lighter. Maybe a box of matches shoved in a junk drawer somewhere. That's not a fire starting kit. That's a single point of failure waiting to happen. Because lighters run dry and matches turn to mush the second they get damp, which in an actual emergency is exactly when you'll need them most. A real kit layers your options: waterproof matches, a ferro rod that works even soaking wet, and reliable tinder that catches even in bad conditions. Fire isn't a luxury in a survival situation, it's water purification through boiling. It's the only source of warmth once the heat's out in January. It's the way you cook the food you spent good money stockpiling. Families who've been through extended winter outages will tell you fire wasn't the thing that made them comfortable, it was the thing that kept them alive. And that's just the first 5. The next 5 items are the ones that separate a decent emergency kit from a system that can actually carry a family through weeks, not days, of real disruption. 10. A 30-day food supply, not a 3-day supply every government website, every disaster prep pamphlet, every emergency management agency tells you the same number: 3 days. Enough food and water to get you through 72 hours. And for a genuine short-term outage, that number might be fine. But ask anyone who lived through a real extended disruption: a hurricane that knocked out power for 2 weeks, a supply chain collapse that emptied shelves for a month, an ice storm that shut down an entire region, and they'll tell you the same thing. 3 days is a number designed to keep you calm, not a number designed to keep you fed. The families who actually made it through those extended events comfortably weren't the ones who panic bought bread and milk the night before the storm hit. They were the ones with 30 days of shelf-stable food already sitting quietly in a closet, rotated regularly, built up a little at a time over months instead of all at once in a single frantic Costco run. Rice, beans, canned proteins, dehydrated meals, the boring stuff that never gets its own dramatic headline, but is exactly what stands between a family and real desperation when the shelves stay empty longer than anyone predicted. And once the food question is solved, the next question every prepared household has to answer is even more uncomfortable. How do you protect what you've built once other people realize you have it and they don't? 9. A reliable personal protection plan. This is the item most preparedness content tiptoes around. And that silence does people a disservice. In any extended crisis, scarcity changes behavior. It doesn't take a total societal collapse for this to matter. It just takes a bad enough situation for long enough that desperate people start looking for what they need somewhere other than a store shelf. Preppers who've thought this through aren't paranoid. They're honest about a pattern that shows up in disaster after disaster. From hurricane looting to grid down chaos. A protection plan isn't about stockpiling weapons and waiting for a fight. It's about having a legal, responsible, well-thought-out way to secure your home, your family, and your supplies, whatever that looks like for your household, your state, and your comfort level. It's about locks that actually hold. A plan for who does what if someone tries to force their way in, and the training to make sure any tool you keep for protection makes your family safer instead of more at risk. The households that skip this step aren't just risking their safety, they're risking everything else on this list, because none of it matters if it gets taken from you in the first bad week. But protection means nothing if you can't actually see what's happening around your own property once the lights go out completely. 8. A reliable off-grid power source somewhere around day 3 of a blackout. Most families hit the same wall. Phones are dead. Flashlight batteries are dying. The one working radio is down to its last charge. And suddenly the household that felt prepared an hour ago is sitting in total darkness with no way to charge anything. No way to run a fan in the heat or a small heater in the cold. No way to keep a medical device running if someone in the house depends on one. A solar generator or a properly maintained battery power station changes the entire equation. It's not about running your whole house like nothing happened. It's about keeping the essentials alive. Communication, light, medical equipment, a way to charge that hand crank radio's backup battery pack if it has one. The families who invested in this before they needed it describe the exact same feeling. Everyone else on the block sitting in the dark. And their house quietly running exactly what it needs to run. It's one of the more expensive items on this list, and it's also the one preppers most consistently say was worth every dollar the first time they actually had to use it. But power is only useful if you have somewhere safe to actually shelter while you're using it, and that's a problem far more households have than they'd like to admit. 7. A real bug-out bag for every family member. Most bug-out bags sold online are built for a single scenario. One adult, hiking out alone, surviving in the wilderness. That's not most people's reality. Most people's reality is a family, kids of different ages, maybe a grandparent with mobility issues, maybe a pet that isn't getting left behind. A single generic bag bought off a website doesn't account for any of that. A real bug-out setup means a bag for every person old enough to carry one, sized and packed for their specific needs, a change of clothes, a way to signal for help, food and water for at least 72 hours, copies of important documents in a waterproof pouch, and for kids specifically. Something familiar and comforting tucked inside, because evacuating a household during a genuine emergency is traumatic enough without a child also losing every sense of normalcy at once. The families who've actually had to evacuate on short notice, wildfire encroaching, floodwaters rising faster than expected, don't remember packing calmly. They remember chaos, and the ones who came through it without losing anything critical were the ones who had bags already packed, already by the door, already tested for weight and fit months before they ever needed to grab them and run. 6. A backup heat source that doesn't need electricity every winter. The same story repeats somewhere in this country. A storm knocks out power across an entire region, temperatures drop into the teens, and families with all-electric homes suddenly have no way to stay warm. Space heaters become useless bricks. Furnaces with electric ignition go silent. And what should have been an inconvenient few days without power turns into a genuine survival situation. Indoors. In a house that was never designed to hold heat without a working HVAC system. A propane heater rated safe for indoor use. A wood-burning option if you have a fireplace or stove. Even a properly ventilated backup source kept for exactly this scenario. These aren't luxury items. They're the difference between an uncomfortable week and a household hypothermia risk. Preppers who've weathered real winter outages consistently name this as the item that mattered more than almost anything else on their shelves. Because you can survive several days without food a lot more easily than you can survive one night at 20 below with no heat at all. And once your family can eat, drink, see, defend, and stay warm. There's still one category of preparation left that most people completely overlook until the exact moment they desperately need it. 5. A portable cooking system that doesn't rely on the Grid A full pantry means nothing if you have no way to actually cook what's in it. This is the gap almost nobody thinks about until they're standing in a powerless kitchen holding a can of beans they can't heat, staring at an electric stove that's now nothing more than a very expensive countertop, a propane camp stove, a rocket stove, even a reliable set of sterno cans kept in reserve. These small, unglamorous tools solve one of the most overlooked problems in emergency preparedness. It's not just about comfort. Cooked food is safer food. Hot meals matter enormously for morale during a stressful stretch. And boiling water is one of the most reliable ways to make questionable water safe to drink when your filter needs backup. The families who sailed through extended outages without much stress at all almost always had this figured out ahead of time: a stove, extra fuel canisters rotated and checked, and the simple habit of testing it twice a year so it isn't the one thing that fails them the night they need it most. But cooking a meal assumes you can actually see what you're doing once the sun goes down. And lighting is a category where most emergency kits quietly fall apart. 4. Long-lasting, hands-free lighting flashlights feel like the obvious answer to a blackout, and they're the reason so many people get caught off guard. A flashlight ties up one hand permanently, burns through batteries fast, and does nothing to light an entire room while you're trying to cook, treat an injury, or keep an eye on kids in the dark. The households that handle extended outages well have layered their lighting the same way they've layered everything else on this list. Headlamps for hands-free work, battery-powered lanterns for lighting a whole room at once, rechargeable options that pair with that solar generator mentioned earlier. So the light never actually runs out as long as the sun comes up the next day. It sounds like a small detail until you've actually lived through a week of fumbling around with a single dying flashlight, dropping things, tripping over furniture you know perfectly well is there but can't see. Good lighting isn't about comfort. It's about avoiding the second disaster, the fall, the burn, the mistake. That so often happens not during the emergency itself, but during the exhausted, poorly lit hours that follow it. 3. A family communication and meetup plan. This is the item that costs nothing and that almost nobody actually has. Cell towers go down. Kids are at school, a spouse is at work, and suddenly a family that's spent hundreds of dollars on gear has no way to find each other and no agreed upon plan for what to do next. A real plan is simple, and that's exactly why it works. A designated out-of-town contact everyone can reach, even when local lines are jammed, a primary meeting spot, and a backup in case the first one isn't safe or reachable, and a clear understanding among every family member, including kids old enough to understand it, about what to do if they can't reach anyone at all. Preppers who've actually lived through a real regional emergency say the fear of not knowing where their family was, even for a few hours, was worse than almost anything else about the entire event. Every dollar spent on food, water, and gear protects a family's body. A communication plan protects their mind, and it's the one item on this entire list that takes an evening to build and costs absolutely nothing. 2. Cash and small bills, kept on hand when the power goes out. Something most people never think about goes with it. Every card reader, every ATM, every digital payment system in the area. Stores that do stay open during an outage can often only take cash, and they can rarely make change for a $100 bill when the register isn't working either. A modest amount of cash, kept in small denominations, tucked somewhere secure and easy to grab, solves a problem that catches even well-prepared families off guard. It's not about hoarding money, it's about liquidity. When the entire digital payment system that modern life quietly depends on simply stops functioning. The households that had this covered were able to buy gas, buy ice, buy last-minute supplies from the one gas station still running on a generator, while everyone else stood in line, unable to pay for anything at all. The 5-minute fix that almost nobody bothers to make until the first time they actually need it and discover their debit card is now a useless piece of plastic. 1. Documented knowledge. Not just stored supplies. Every prepper who has genuinely lived through a real disaster says some version of the same thing when asked what mattered most. It wasn't any single item on their shelf. It was knowing how to use everything on it. A filter is worthless if nobody in the house knows how to assemble it. A first aid kit is worthless if a tourniquet has never once been practiced on a willing volunteer under calm, controlled conditions. A propane stove is worthless if it's never been test lit until the one night it absolutely has to work on the first try. This is the item most people skip entirely because it doesn't come in a box and it can't be bought in a single afternoon. It's a printed binder, kept with the rest of the supplies, holding step-by-step instructions for every single item in the household's kit. Purification steps, first aid procedures, the family communication plan written out in plain language. So that even the person in the house who's never touched any of this gear before could pick up that binder during an actual crisis and follow it exactly. Preppers with decades of experience will tell you flatly that this is the item they wish they'd built first instead of last. Because gear without knowledge is just expensive clutter, and knowledge without gear is just theory. Together, they're the only combination that actually holds up when everything else stops working. None of this is about fear. It's not about waiting for the worst to happen, and it's not about living life convinced that collapse is around every corner. It's about one simple, unglamorous truth that every family eventually learns. Either ahead of time or the hard way, the version of you standing in a powerless kitchen at 2 a.m. is going to be exhausted, stressed, and making decisions on very little sleep. Every item on this list exists to make that version of you a little safer, a little calmer, and a lot more capable before that night ever actually arrives. If this list opened your eyes to a gap in your own setup, that's exactly what it was built to do. Start with one item this week, not all 15 at once. Preparedness isn't a single purchase. It's a habit, built slowly, tested often, and ready the one day you actually need it.